Hi, everybody. This is January 8th, 2025, and I'm posting these videos as a form of therapy for the trauma of watching my last relative in Vancouver, my little brother with Down syndrome, Paul Cairns, 64, be locked up by the British Columbia New Democratic Party government for 588 days. And then he died alone among strangers who didn't understand his speech at Burnaby Hospital. So today there's been a lot of events in the news, and I should probably just give a background to what happened. Is my brother was my visits. I had an agreement with the government and with my brother's group home, L'Arche. L''ARCHE. It's we now know it's a nonprofit organization that was started as an sex cult by a retired Canadian naval officer, Jean Vanier, and defrocked Roman Catholic priest from France, Thomas Philippe. They started these residential homes for incapable adults as a way of getting access to their female immigrant caregivers. We didn't find that out. That went on for 50 years, and we didn't find out until 2019 when Jean Vanier died. He almost got the Order of Canada. But anyways, so I had an agreement that I could visit with Paul and he could visit with me at my home twice a week. And I discoveed in January of 2022, the group home L'Arche terminated all of Paul's contact with anyone that didn't work for them, purportedly on the basis there had been a COVID-19 outbreak in the group home. And one thing led to another, and I had to apply to court to get a copy of a document that they say gave all of Paul's civil rights, assigned all of his human rights to my 82-year-old Catholic nun sister, 4,000 kilometers away in Ontario, who's 16 years older than Paul, who's never lived with him, who left home when he was born. She's never even been in the same room with him, never even met him on more than a few dozen occasions over the course of his 64 years. On the other hand, I'm 2 years older than Paul. I grew up with him. There was no educational systems for Paul when we were growing up. My mother started a preschool for disabled children. And I taught Paul painstakingly over many months to print the only word that he could print, his first name, Paul. And that was the only word that he could read. So I found out in January of 2022 that the group home had created a fraudulent and what in my opinion, is a fraudulent and forged power of attorney over Paul, naming this nun in Ontario, whom neither of us have grown up with and who I don't know, other than some unfortunate experiences that I've had with her, naming this nun in Ontario as his guardian. I now know that she gave his entire inheritance, $25,000 inheritance to L'Arche, and they gave her what in my opinion, is a kickback of a check for $12,500 to my father's estate, which she had taken over. Anyways, so I found out in January of 2022 about this document. I complained to the Burnaby RCMP about it on August 26th of 2022, and within 4 days, the lawyer for the group home, Tara Britnell, Britnell, wrote the nun and said she had to terminate Paul's contact with me permanently or they would evict him from the group home with 30 days notice. They weren't going to wait for the police investigation to work its way through. What I now know is that the police officer that I spoke to never did an investigation. She said to me that she was going to get the original document, subpoena the original document, and interview the witnesses. Paul was never allowed to see a lawyer. No lawyer was ever consulted for him. 2 low-level caregivers were the witnesses, so-called witnesses, to this forged document. So within 4 days, 588 days before he had a stroke, they terminated his visits with me, and I moved heaven and earth to try and legally reinstate his visits with me. And I bumped up against the most insane judicial response. The first, or the second judge that we went to, her name was Itya Sharma. She said, Ms. Walker relies on some kind of right for these siblings to visit with each other. Like, she never read the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and Freedom of Association. And that was kind of what I also now know is that the Catholic Church paid for my sister's. She hired a lawyer in Ottawa what he does is he represents pedophile priests across Canada. And she also hired a law firm in Vancouver at your expense. All she's ever done is work as a drug and alcohol counselor. But I estimate that the Catholic Church spends $500,000, about over $500,000 on legal expenses, quite a bit more than that now, of taxpayer money, because they get a tax deduction for charitable purposes. And this was not a charitable endeavor, it was a personal endeavor. So, long story short, I was not able to set this document aside, and after I reported it to the police. What the police officer did, as I now believe, is she went to the group home and tipped them off that I had complained, and that's when they terminated my visits. And shortly before, within hours of Paul dying, I got a call from the Burnaby RCMP saying they'd been ordered by Ottawa to investigate the fraudulent and forged power of attorney. And I was so excited, I went to court the next morning and I told the judge that I had a document that would reopen my right to visit my brother. But we didn't get on. And when I went to visit Paul, I'm posting these facts just in case anything happens to me. So in the morning I went to court, did not get Paul's visits reinstated. By then he had a stroke and he was in Burnaby Hospital, and the nun only allowed me a 10-minute visit per day, although I waited in the hospital lobby for 12 hours a day for the 10 days that he was there. But when I got back, so once the nun knew that I knew she was being investigated for the fraudulent and forged power of attorney, Paul had to die. And he had been on a ventilator. He was recovering. He had some kind of brain incident, but he was recovering. He had sat up in bed. He had grabbed a book from my hand. He turned the pages. He squeezed my hand, wouldn't let it go. When I said my name, he looked at me. He scanned the pages of the book. I brought him a huge, big coffee table book about the lives of Hollywood movie stars, and he looked at it. But when the nun found out that I knew she was being investigated, she was pissed. And my brother had been wearing a ventilator. He had a ventilator over his mouth. The ventilator was removed. And he appeared to me to be sedated. And I had complained to the nurse, the charge nurse. I said, he seems to be over-sedated. And there was no reason for him to be sedated at all because he was not in any pain. He'd had a brain incident. He was not in pain, but he was sedated. And the Dr. Michael Baker, whom I've complained about to the coroner and to the College of Physicians and Surgeons, asked to meet with me in the hallway. And I knew what he was going to say. He was going to say that Paul was dying. And I knew Paul better than he did, and he wasn't dying. So I said, he better be alive on Monday morning, because I knew the nun would tell the doctor to administer a lethal injection of a sedative. So Paul could not withstand both having the ventilator removed and the suppression of his respiratory system by a sedative. I believe they gave him hydromorphone. Everyone that I've described this scenario to has said to me they did medical assistance in dying on him. But medical assistance in dying, which is assisted suicide in Canada, 5 out of every 100 deaths in Canada is caused by a doctor or a nurse administering a lethal injection. So if you didn't know that, wake up. So I believe they administered hydromorphone and killed him. So when I saw him, when I went into the room after I had told the judge that the police were investigating, the nun said to me, she wouldn't look me in the eye. You know, she had her jaw set and she was pissed. And she said, say goodbye to Paul, he's dying. And he looked dead to me at that point. His hand was not responsive as it had been. His eyes were wide open and unfocused. The ventilator, she'd removed the ventilator. He had no medical supports at all. I can't remember if he had intravenous or not, but his ventilator was removed. And she wouldn't let me near his head, so I couldn't get near his head. She's the single most evil person that I have ever personally met. Anyway, so he died. I wasn't told, if there was a funeral, I wasn't told about it. She likes that. She fancies herself to be an angel of death. And I believe that she'd worked out a secret arrangement with the British Columbia New Democratic Party government where they said that if she put Paul's inheritance back into an account for him, then they would support her as being his guardian. So as soon as he died, she took that money out, paid herself back. But it wasn't enough. So what she did, when they found out that I knew that the police were investigating them, they brought in a huge application to have me declared a vexatious litigant, a 5-day application. And I wasn't allowed to cross-examine the nun on her affidavits. And I'm not allowed to be at court for more than 2 hours per day. I had a heart attack in 2016. And I had a medical certificate from my family doctor and from my cardiologist. And so on the second day of this vexatious litigant hearing against me in November, 6 months after Paul had died, the judge keeps on going past 12 o'clock, and I stood up and I said, I've got to leave. My 2 hours is up. And the judge said, can't you sit in the lobby? Or can't you sit in the gallery? That's what she said. And I said no. And also, the nuns' lawyers, with all their $500,000 of expenses, had not put my materials in the evidence binders before the judge, which you're required to do. My materials weren't in there. Their evil Ottawa lawyer who acts for pedophile priests, Charles Gibson, said, "Oh, can't you photocopy those and put them in?" So I got up and I left, and I've applied for permission to appeal her decision to go ahead. I applied for an adjournment pending the decision of the RCMP about this fraudulent and forged power of attorney, and they're also investigating Paul's death. And the judge dismissed my application for an adjournment. So I've applied for leave to appeal that decision, and I'm going to be in the British Columbia Court of Appeal at 800 Smythe Street next week at 10 a.m. at 800 Smythe Street on January 15th. And I'm sure it doesn't look good. I've been to the Supreme Court of Canada twice, and I hope three's a charm, because I'm sure we're going to be going to the Supreme Court of Canada. But the good news, if it can be called good news, is I found a lawyer who successfully sued the Catholic Church for a pedophile priest. And I'm going to be interviewed by her secretary this week. and I'm going to sue the ass off this evil nun. But so that's it for now. And just one last point that I wanted to make, and thank you for hanging in if you have so far, is that I've warned people before any of this happened, when I discovered that Canada was killing disabled people as a form of suicide. Disabled people who aren't dying, they don't need to have a reasonably foreseeable death. And it wants to expand the kinds of people that Canada has killed 60,000 Canadians, paid doctors and nurses to administer lethal injections to 60,000 Canadians with the flimsiest of evidence. 2 signatures from any 2 medical professionals. They don't need to know the patient, and the signature of the patient. They've offered medical assistance in dying to a veteran who asked for a wheelchair ramp for his house. This is Justin Trudeau's pet project, just like Hitler. That's how Hitler started, is he killed sick and disabled people. He cleared out all the hospitals and sanatoriums in Germany. He killed 350,000 people this way. But what I wanted to say is that I warned 4 years ago that this would open Canada's sovereignty to be challenged by the rest of the world, and that's exactly what has happened. Is this week Donald Trump threatened to annex Canada. I mean, he's clearly said he's going to use financial pressure. He ruled out military invasion at this time, but he says he's going to use financial pressure to annex Canada and make it the 51st state and appoint Justin Trudeau as the governor. That's what we're facing. And I warned you. It's not for no reason. It's the easiest thing in the world to kill a sick, vulnerable, and disabled person. But there's a damn good reason why we don't do it. And this is it. I mean, they don't do this in Africa. A society that cannot protect its own vulnerable citizens doesn't deserve to have its sovereignty recognized. So the first thing that Pierre Poilievre needs to do when he takes over is to roll back the MAID scheme in Canada, the euthanasia scheme in Canada. And people are very much against this. Once people start killing people, they love it. It's like Stephen King said, murder is like potato chips. You can't stop with just one. And I've heard that's got so much feedback from people you'd never dream of, who they would fight to the death for the right to kill other people this way. Anyways, so pray for me. Please contribute to our GoFundMe account. I haven't had a contribution since October 15th, and I've had to pay $680 this month just to ask for leave to appeal the decision finding me a vexatious litigant. And we're just starting. This fight is just starting. So please pray, but more importantly, pray for us, and your words of support mean everything. Take care, everyone. I love you all.